The circus arrives without warning. No announcements precede it, no paper notices on downtown posters and billboards, no mentions or advertisements in local newspapers. It is simply there when yesterday it was not. Hello, I'm Emily, and today I'm going to be reviewing The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. This is the first time I've ever done a video review, so we'll see how this goes. I'm going to start out with a brief non-spoiler section, and then I'm going to switch into spoilers, so obviously don't watch the spoiler part if you haven't read the book, and we're going to see how this goes. Basically, to start out, The Night Circus is an adult fantasy. In it, there are these two magicians who decide to have this contest, and each one of them picks a player. The two players' names are Marco and Celia, and they play out this over years, and eventually realize that the contest doesn't exactly end the way they think it's going to. A lot of people really like this book, so when I found this copy at a library book sale, I picked it up because I figured it was probably pretty good. I read it when I went to Italy a couple weeks ago. I liked the book. I didn't love it the way that a lot of other people have. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I thought it was a really solid read, and there was a lot of stuff that was really interesting about it, but it wasn't my favorite book ever. The writing style is wonderful. It's done in a combination of third-person present tense, which doesn't happen very often, and there's like these second-person interludes spaced between it, which is also awesome. It's basically told a bunch of little scenes that somehow like all pile up to tell the story. So basically, I liked it. It was a really good book. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I'm not sure what more to say in this non-spoilery section, so I'm going to transfer into spoilers now. So we're going to start out doing this. I have like a little outline here, and we'll see how this goes. I'm going to start out by talking about the characters. There's a lot of characters, but I'm going to talk about like the big characters. We'll start with Marco. He's a sweetheart. I loved him. I thought it was really interesting how he was using his magic to alter his appearance. I didn't actually catch on right away. In the first like section he's in, they describe him as having like dull green eyes. And then later on, he's described as having bright green eyes. It's like, okay, that's weird. I thought his eyes were a different color than that. But I sort of just like set it aside and went on reading. Until later on, when Celia figures out that he actually is literally making himself look different using his magic. I thought that was really interesting because like no one ever figures out that's not what he looks like, except for Celia. So everyone goes around thinking that Marco is more handsome than he actually is, though apparently he looks fine when... whatever. He was my favorite character. He had his head on a lot straighter than Celia did, which I think was the point, but I liked him. He was great. And then Celia, I actually didn't mind her, which is interesting because I have a tendency to really dislike female leads. Like, that's one of the major reasons that I don't have as big a problem with Allegiant as everybody else does, is because I really hated Triss's guts by the end and didn't care what happened to her. Yes, I know. There's other reasons that I don't dislike Allegiant as much as everybody else does, but that is one of them. I liked Celia well enough. She wasn't my favorite character, but I had no problems with her. We'll put Bailey, Poppet, and Widget together. I didn't have a lot of opinions about them. Like, I didn't dislike them, but I didn't, like, really like them either because I was a lot more invested in Marco and Celia. It was interesting how they did Bailey's part of the story, because Bailey's part of the story takes place significantly later than a large portion of Marco and Celia's arc does. So it was very interesting in the end when Bailey has a different climax than Marco and Celia do. So it basically jumps back and forth between Marco and Celia's climax and then Bailey's. And Bailey's climax takes place after Marco and Celia's, so you're literally reading what happens after Marco and Celia's climax before what happens to them actually happens, which is really interesting. We'll talk about Prospero and we'll call him Alexander. These characters were interesting because of the way that they're sort of both the antagonists, because they're the reason that these things are happening to Marco and Celia, but one of them is considerably less bad than the other. You start out thinking that, we'll call him Prospero, we could also call him Hector, but we'll say Prospero. You start out thinking that Prospero is, well, not necessarily a great guy, but like he's not like the ultimate villain either, because the way that Erin Morgenstern presents Alexander is really like stereotypically villain, so you think that Alexander is the bad guy. But then you hit this point partway through the book where you realize that Prospero is actually the ultimate bad guy, and that Alexander actually has Marco's best interests at heart, sort of at least, Well, Prospero just wants to win and doesn't really care what happens to Celia, even though he's his own daughter. I'm going to go on and talk a little bit about world building. The contest is actually really cool. When you try to describe the book, it comes off as slightly Hunger Games-esque, which is a little bit annoying. But it was interesting because this is less like a Hunger Games last person standing. Well, it is a Hunger Games last person standing thing, but it's also a battle of philosophies. So basically, Alexander trained Prospero, and Prospero thought that the way that Alexander did magic was kind of lame or something like that. So he went and started his own form of magic. Prospero and Alexander have these periodic contests to decide which one of theirs magic is better, and Alexander keeps winning, which obviously makes Prospero mad because he doesn't like losing, so he keeps having these contests even though Alexander would really just like them to stop. It was interesting because as the contest goes on, you can start to see the differences between the way Marco does magic and the way Celia does magic. Marco's magic has more stamina. He's able to keep going longer because it takes away less of himself. While Celia's magic is very tied to herself and it's more exhausting that way. That is why Alexander's students keep winning, is because in the end it's a waiting game. Alexander's students can always manage to outlast Prospero's because Prospero's, well, basically eventually get sick of the contest and we'll say they end it. In the end, it basically proves that Alexander's form of magic is the better way to do magic because it's more sustaining and you're not gonna like lose it or something. For the most part, there was a lot of really good world building. Like, I loved the explanations of all the different things there are in this circus, but I feel like there could have been a little bit more world building in places. Like, there's a lot of mystery and actually comparatively few answers. For example, towards the end of the novel, it becomes obvious that none of the characters are actually aging. But I would have liked a bit more of an explanation of why they're not aging, and I would like it to a bit more like of this to actually affect things, because the characters know they're not aging, but with the exception of a few, no one seems really bothered by it. So I would have liked to have seen some more about that, an explanation of why it's happening. I also would have liked a better explanation about why Alexander and Marco have no shadows, because they say towards the end that Alexander has no shadow because he's so old, but Marco is not old, so why does Marco not have a shadow? So you can't just argue that only Alexander has no shadows, Marco doesn't either. So is this something that like happens because of the kind of magic they do? Or is it something else? I would have really liked some explanations on that. There's some stuff about both kinds of magic, a bit more like world building about how it works exactly, and with Celia's magic. I keep saying Cecilia because Celia is, for some reason, really hard to say. How is she just sustaining the circus? They say she is, but like, how does that work exactly? The other kind of magic was Marco's magic. I was really fascinated by the way Marco did magic because as far as I can tell, a large portion of his magic is done by writing things out. And he's got this like paper model of the circus that he uses as like a conduit to control what's going on. And I would have liked building on how this works because I think it's a really fascinating magic system. And I would have liked to have seen like exactly what all this writing he does in his notebooks does and how it works. Basically, I thought Marco's magic was awesome, and I just wanted more of it because it was so cool. I'd never seen anything like it before. Okay, romance. The relationship between Marco and Isabel was really insta-lovey, and I would have liked to have seen things drawn out a little bit there. Like, yes, they weren't the actual romantic pairing, and by drawing out things with them, you run the risk of people actually liking them as a relationship more than liking Marco and Celia. So I guess I sort of understand why it's kept brief, but I still thought that, like, they literally kiss the first time they meet. That's, like, total insta-love. Marco and Celia, I liked them, but I would have liked a little bit more of them interacting. It's a romance novel. But Marco and Celia themselves are not in this book very much. Like, they are, but, like, they're definitely not together very often because Celia's always at the circus and Marco is always back in London. I didn't necessarily feel like their relationship was insta-love per se because they've known each other for so long by the time they actually get together. But I would like to see more of their interactions over the years so we could get to know them a little bit more as a relationship. Other things, I'm not actually sure how I feel about the ending. I mean, one of them didn't, well, technically they both died, sort of. But I'm not sure how I feel about it, really. Like, part of me likes they kind of ended up together, but at the same time, they're kind of trapped in the circus, and who knows how that'll go. I feel like that'd get old kind of fast, especially if the circus gets old. But I'm having trouble coming up with something to say about it because I really don't know how I feel about it. I can't say that I dislike it, but I can't say that I like it either. So I guess it happened. I've sort of been talking about this already, but I'm going to talk about a couple more things that I really would have liked to have seen extrapolated on. Also, I should point out that I'm fresh out of a year of creative writing classes, so I kind of read like an author now, and a lot of these things that I'm pointing out are going to be things like I feel like it would have worked better if the author would have done it like this, so just keep that in mind. I would have liked some more backstory in places. We got a lot of backstory. There's a lot of backstory, but there were places where I feel like we could have gotten a bit more. Like, the biggest one I can think of is we never got the story of Prospero and Celia's mother. Maybe it didn't really matter a whole lot, but I feel like what happened with Celia's mother defines the way her relationship with Prospero works. So I think it would have been better to actually explain what happened between Prospero and Celia's mother, who may or may not have a name, I can't remember. I also feel like there should have been some kind of final confrontation between Prospero and Celia. As already stated, I have really mixed feelings about the ending, and I feel like having some kind of confrontation between those two characters might have actually helped me a little bit more, because basically in a lot of ways Prospero has ruined Celia's life and she never exactly gets the chance to confront him about this. I also would have liked more interaction between Marco and Alexander, especially towards the end, because towards the very end of the book, Marco says that he forgives Alexander for everything that happened to him, but I never got the impression that Marco was in any place that he would have forgiven Alexander for anything. And I'm not saying that it's impossible, but I feel like we should have had more interaction between Marco and Alexander that would have built up to this point where Marco could say that he forgives him. And then the interludes were awesome because they're in second car. The interludes were awesome because they're in second person, and who writes in second person? From a reader's standpoint, I loved the interludes. But from an author's standpoint, I'm not sure we needed them. Like, they sort of are this, like, explanation of what the circus feels like, but you sort of already get that from the rest of the narration. And I'm not sure that they added anything to the plot. I feel like they just sort of, like, bogged things down a little. Granted, I didn't really have a major problem with them until the last one, and that's only because the last, like, actual chapter ends with Bailey starting talking about the circus and saying, the circus arrives without warning. That is the same as the first sentence of the book, and I really, really thought it would be awesome if the first sentence and the last sentence of the book were the same thing. She puts in the interlude, but she kind of has to, given that she's already committed to it in the rest of the book. But I feel like if there were no interludes, that last sentence would have had even more of a chance to shine than it already did. So I think that's about all that I have to say. I don't know if that seemed really negative or not. I really actually did like the book. I'm going to try to get up some more videos soon, but my work schedule's been a little bit uncooperative with filming when you need natural light. So we'll see how it goes. I'm working on the first of my theory videos, but I'm in the process of finding textual evidence for my theories, and I have a very large number of pages to go through to find said textual evidence, so hopefully I'll get it out soon. Thank you for watching. Please comment down below about what you thought of this book, or if you have anything that you think that you would like to discuss that I didn't talk about. Thank you for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you later. Bye!